Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show. Hey, we've got a deep dive episode into Node 24 and all of the wonderful goodies that it brings. There's actually quite a lot of stuff, and we gave you a little bit of highlights in the Tuesday episode, but there's a lot to cover, isn't there, Eric?
There is. Yeah, Node 24 comes with a lot of goodies and a lot of implications for the TypeScript developer.
Yes. So why don't we just jump right into it? Where should we start?
Well, I think the big thing is that officially now, in an LTS version of Node, TypeScript is supported for the masses.
Yep. Yeah, and you don't have to do anything, right? So, I just tested it with a little repo that I'm going to share at the end of the episode where you can see all of the code snippets for all the language features and stuff that was just released in Node 24, but when I tested it, I did not create a tsconfig.json file. I just had a package JSON. That was it. And I can just execute node, snippet.ts, and it just works. There's nothing I have to do. Now, in order to add typings, I did have to add that to my package JSON. And then in order to do isolated modules, I did have to add a tsconfig.json. But just like right out of the box, you didn't need that tsconfig.json file.
Super awesome. And yep. I think this is going to be huge for folks that are on the fence about Dino or Bun. This is straight from the OG, from the horse's mouth.
Yep.
And
you'll want TypeScript 5.8 if you're starting on a greenfield project with Node 24 because you want to enable that erasable syntax only flag. We keep hammering it home just so we keep repeating it because it is important, but there are language features inside of TypeScript currently that are not compatible with Node, and by using erasable syntax only, it ensures that you get a compiler error if you try to use those features so that it makes sure that it's compatible with Node's type stripping. And I think the nuance here is that Node, so by default, uses type stripping, okay, but it does have a flag called experimental transform types. And the deal with this is that it does allow some of those runtime emit features. So the ones that it lays out, and I'm quoting from the Node.js documentation, enum declarations, namespaces with runtime code, legacy module keyword with runtime code, parameter properties, and import aliases. So for namespaces and module typings, it does support type-only declarations. So if you're not trying to export a runtime value, those will get transformed properly and it'll work. Otherwise, what'll happen is it'll throw an unsupported TypeScript syntax exception. So you can use enums with Node, but you do have to enable that experimental transform types flag. The question is, should you do that, Eric?
I would recommend no. And at this time, at least, there is, we talked about this before, there is an ECMA proposal for enums, but the likelihood that it'll look exactly like TypeScript enums also probably low based on what I know. So I think in TypeScript in general, it's just probably best to steer away from enums. And we can link to a couple of options for you with some trade-offs that provide similar functionality, but you should avoid that. And then the other reason to maybe avoid this is it involves another compile step in your Node process, which you might not want. It's not using TSC, so it's not using the slowness that is the legacy TypeScript compiler versus TypeScript Go or anything like that. It's using, I believe, SWC. Could be wrong about that.
No, I think you're right. And that was just. I was just looking at this. Node.js uses a customized version of SWC, and that's from Marco Ippolito, and we'll link to that blog post again. We already did an episode on Node 23 where TypeScript was introduced. But again, I think it's just a good reminder that it's not shelling out to TSC, but it's also not free. And even though SWC is written in Rust, that also, it still adds a little bit of overhead, and time will tell. Like maybe once TypeScript Go is stable, you'd think that maybe this would be a little bit easier. But I think for now, you probably just want to avoid experimental transform types unless you're like bringing in, more legacy TypeScript code base into Node. Then maybe you do want that.
Yeah, exactly. And for all the reasons stated already, I think you should probably avoid using enums in net new code.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. What's next on the docket that Node 24 brings?
This is really cool. They're adding a permissions model, kind of akin to Dino. It is now stable with the -- permission flag. And this is kind of cool. They're doing it in a backwards compatible way, which makes sense, right? Because Node can't break the internet. So what happens is now you tack on what is restricted versus like Dino where you would tack on what is allowed.
Okay.
So this is kind of like a block list versus an allow list.
Yes. And the big thing here to know is that this is not going to guarantee that like malicious code is not going to work, because malicious code can just bypass these permissions because it's like an opt-out type of thing. So that's the caveat. But for trusted code, your own code, this could be useful where you want to, right now, it supports restricting file system, WASI, the WebAssembly, native add-ons, and workers. So you can't restrict network permissions. That's kind of the big elephant in the room here, is you can't restrict what goes out on the network. But at least those other ones you can. And then there is a process API that you can use to check whether or not any permissions are in place. So that's process.permission.has. So you could say process.permission.has fs.write, and that would return true if there is a write permission that's active.
And that's useful so that you don't throw at runtime. Because if you try to access this, it'll just bomb and won't allow you to do a write if the write permission is restricted.
Yep. Now, if you're comparing this to Dino's security model, just really quickly, it's obviously more limited because Dino allows you to restrict like network access, so it's locked down by default. So you do have to like manually allow specific things. Second of all, the permissions don't get inherited by child processes or worker threads, so that's something to keep in mind.
That's right. So because it doesn't apply to child processes, it's a little easier for malicious code to work around these.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, certainly it might stop something, but I wouldn't rely on it.
Yeah. So it's important to mention this is not the end of Node's security model. So I wanted to link to the Next 10 working group. They have a security model deep dive and strategy where they go into a lot more detail about what Node's security model is going to be and what the strategy is around that. So if you would like to plan ahead or have some input into that, you can kind of see what's cooking over there.
And I think it's also important to note that this is similar to Dino in that it applies to the whole process, not like on a per file basis. And I know a lot of folks have asked for that. And the limitation there, if you were like, oh, it would be really cool if you could have a per file basis permissions, I totally agree. Because then you could be like, okay, this is the place where we write to disk, and only this file can write to disk and no one else. And that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is V8 in that one, because the relationship between files and code is lost by the time you're running inside of V8. So like that particular permission model is more challenging to implement in the current incarnation of V8.
Yeah. I'm doing some .NET MAUI development, so I'm building like a native app, and there is that kind of permission model where there's like the user data storage where everything, you can do whatever you want inside of that user data holder, that storage area, but anything outside of that you can't touch.
That's right.
Okay, cool. Another major update was the underlying V8 engine that Node relies on. So that got updated to 13.6. And normally you're like, okay, what's cool about that, Eric?
A lot of cool things.
So it's not just performance either. So not only is it faster, the new update, it also gives us more JavaScript language features.
Yeah. So I think one of the big ones is we have a new atomic primitive called Atomics.pause. And this is an interesting one because it allows you to provide like a micro weight to a hint to the CPU. You're not guaranteed that it'll actually respect you, but you can hint that at runtime, we need to pause this instruction while we're waiting for something. So this is actually mostly useful in a spin lock situation. So like say you're like, while truing, while true atomics compare exchange, that's one way of checking whether a lock is held or not. Like compare exchange is kind of like a semaphore where you're saying, okay, is this value the thing that I want? No, let's keep repeating and just hammering this lock. So a pause allows you to do is say, just give it some time instead of hammering it as hard as you can. Give it a little bit of time, back off a little bit, and you can pass it a duration hint. And you can say, give it a little time. So you can do like exponential back off by calculating your own exponent and doing .pause, pass in a duration. Yeah, pretty slick. And this has the opportunity to make your web worker code more efficient because you don't have to spin super hard on a lock and chew up resources when you don't have to.
You know what's spinning right now? My head with all that jargon that you just dropped on me. So if you're in the same boat, don't feel bad. Multi-threading and concurrency has always broken my brain because I've come from, .NET developer background where we have to deal with multi-threading. Now, in Node.js, it's single-threaded asterisk because now you can do multi-threading in Node.js, and atomics are one of those primitives that you can do for concurrency. So I wanted to shout out to Pavel Romanov, who has a great article on multi-threading in Node.js, and we'll link to that in the show notes if you want to learn a little bit more about shared memory operations and some of that, like where would I use atomics and stuff. I think it's pretty low level, don't you think?
Yeah, I think you'd only be using this if you're using web workers, because that's the only way to do concurrency in JavaScript.
Yes.
And in fact, if you're going to be in Oslo next week, I'll be talking about this in my talk.
Woohoo!
As a way of improving your JavaScript performance.
There you go. Go to Eric's talk to learn more about atomics and workers. Okay, what's next?
Next up is kind of just a miss in the JavaScript API, but we are now adding float 16 arrays. So before, the lowest bitness array that you could have was float 32. Now we have float 16, which is also known in the biz as a half float. This is a thing that has been supported in WebGPU and WebGL for a good long while now, and they're useful if you don't need full bit depth. You can save a lot of memory, for example, if you don't need full bit depth, especially like if you have canvases or textures, things where you don't need full color precision. You can save a lot of money because you're saving memory. And these are useful in deep learning models. For example, like Stable Diffusion uses half floats to represent their matrices, and you can pack bigger and bigger matrices in here with lower precision floats. So that's another reason if you're doing this new large language model type learning use case.
Can you educate me a little bit? By default is a float 32 bits?
In JavaScript, you get a float 64 by default.
Oh, okay. So there's 64-bit by default, right? But then now we can do... So, okay, what's the difference between float 16 and like an int 32?
So this is a great question. Int 32 can only represent integers 32 bits. So you don't have any like decimal place.
Gotcha.
Floats are representing decimal numbers, so you have a decimal place. Now the difference between like a float 16 and like a float 64 is the number of numbers you can represent. So in float 16, you have limited precision in the infinite continuum of numbers between 1 and 0. Like now you can represent more or less of them.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, you probably wouldn't be using this for normal web dev stuff. This is like for specialized.
Yeah.
I mean, you could use it for like game dev, maybe.
Yeah. And it's especially if it's, if you're really saving on bits, like for example, like, cause if you have a really big array of values and you don't need a lot of precision, you can save a lot of memory going from like float 64 to float 16.
Okay. Cool. Well, that's nice. The next one is a web API that we now get in Node 24, which is international .duration format, and that's international INTL. It's not, you don't have to fully spell it out. But if you've ever used Moment.js, which is what I use or have used in the past, you know that you can format a duration. I do this a lot for my game application because people play games and they report their time. So they could say, I played this game for 65 hours, which is how long I played Avowed. And I need to show that in the web UI to the user. And so you can format it different ways, right? Now, this is now native, at least inside of Node, and I think it's also available through polyfills in the browser. But the International Duration Format API is a way for you to format the long way or the short way. So you could say you played 65 hours and you can spell out hours, but it's localized. So you could show it in whatever locale the user is in. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to do that yourself or use a third-party library.
Yeah, this is super cool. And there's also an additional style that you can do, which is narrow, which you'll do like the 1H 64 min 40S.
Oh, don't even talk to me about that, because that is how PlayStation's API exposes durations. So I'm well aware of how to deal with that. So .NET actually is really nice. It does support that short format, and then now so does your web app. So that's nice.
Yeah, super slick.
Cool. The other thing that we touched on in a previous episode that I'd not known about, but is now available in Node 24, is the using keyword. So this is for disposal of resources. So if you, on an object, add a property that is typed as symbol.dispose, so like passing it in the square brackets index, then if you use the using keyword on it, it will clean it up. And you can now also use the await keyword on it too. So you're using your disposal method could be async, and so you can await using. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Another cool one that's come down the pipe is Error.isError. And you'd be like, wait, why do I need to do this? Well, turns out knowing if something is an error in JavaScript is particularly fraught for a lot of reasons. One of them being you can technically throw anything. It doesn't have to be an error. And also, instance of error can provide false negatives when you have like a cross realm, like from an iframe or like from Node's VM modules. So you don't really know if it actually is an error very easily without like inspecting it and poking it like deeply. And it's kind of a pain. So
that was my next question, which is why can't I just do instance of error? But apparently there's some gotchas with that.
Yeah. So now you can know if something is quote unquote a real native JavaScript error, which is very valuable information to have, especially if you're doing like something error reporting. You're like, okay, I actually need to know if this is real error. And then, for example, now you can do serialization and safely reconstruct these errors and describe them to a browser. This is useful in structured clone. You know, if you need to do special error behavior for actual real native errors. And in Node, I believe there is a special like brand for like real native errors. So now you can know these things are real errors.
Cool. Well, if you ever wanted to know if an error is really an error and water is wet, then you can use this new API. That's cool. URLPattern we did highlight in the Tuesday episode, but just as a reminder, if you've ever needed to create routes and do path manipulation and parsing, where you'd say like /products/ID, where that ID is some sort of, pattern, could be a number, could be a slug, whatever it is. Usually you had to either write it yourself or you have to rely on a framework to do it for you. So like React Router can do this, Next.js can do this, et cetera, et cetera. But now that's built into the web API. It's just called URL pattern. And the way that you use this is you just say like new URL pattern, and then you can pass the path name. And inside of that path name, you can use components, and they're prefixed with a colon. So it'd be like /books/:ID. And then you can execute the pattern just like a regex, and it will take those capture groups out, and you can interrogate them. It like returns an object. So that's really nice. So you can get those path names and stuff out of URLs when you parse them. So you don't have to do that yourself. So this, I think, is going to be really helpful if you are working inside of Node.js, because in the browser, this is not supported everywhere. It's still an experimental API. So like it's not even supported at all in Firefox, as an example.
Or Safari.
Or Safari. Okay. So in the browser, you're probably going to be relying on a framework or, a polyfill to do this. But if you're working inside of native Node, where you got like an Express server or whatever, you can just do this. So that's nice.
Yeah, and I will definitely direct people towards this API because regular expressions are, especially on the server, a great way of doing like a RDoS attack, regular expression denial of service attack, if you do it wrong. So having like the runtime do it for you is probably the best move.
Yeah, that's nice. And speaking of creating multiple problems and killing their performance, there's some new regex language features too. So we've got RegExp.escape. This is just a simple API for when you have a raw string and you need to escape that string to pass to a regex constructor. If you're not constructing that string yourself, this is useful because like if you've got user input, why would you be passing user input straight to a regex constructor? I do not know. Maybe that's a bad idea. But in cases where you do need to do it, then this is going to be super helpful.
Yeah, that's right. You don't want someone giving you a malicious string that is also a RDoS that could get put in your database or saved somewhere.
Yes.
This is a good thing.
Well, so this is good. This is like a sanitization for any kind of user input that you want to pass to a regex constructor. We've got regex modifiers. This was new to me. This is a TC39 proposal by our good TypeScript friend, Ram Buckton. But this allows you to do sub-expression modifiers. So, Eric, when you got like a regex and you do, backslash, blah, 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 my pattern, backslash, and then you can pass different modifiers. So you can say like I for ignore case or M for multi-line, right? You're familiar with that?
Yep.
So this allows you to do it inside of like capture groups and sub-expressions inside of that regex. So it's definitely something that I haven't like dealt with before, but I guess other engines support this. And now the proposal is for the JavaScript engine to support this. So that is now available in Node 24.
Yeah, and this will tersen up your regular expressions as well, because you'd be like, if I had to do, there's a lot of boilerplate you got to throw in if you were trying to do like a regular expression, and it's like, okay, this part can be any case, but this part can't. And it's gonna speed up your day. It'll make your life better.
Yeah, so you can be more specific, where you don't just have to say, just ignore case for the entire string. Like, there's actually a part of this string that I do want to be case sensitive, but the rest can be ignored, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Next up, another regex feature. You can now have duplicate named capture groups, which is great, because before this was a major annoyance, especially if you needed to grab multiple sections of the string and treat it as the same thing. It was just more boilerplate code you had to write to like merge those sets together. And now you can have duplicate named capture groups.
Yeah, like the example that is shown in the proposal is like matching a year in a string. So like in the example that I have in the repo, if you imagine you have a string like 2025-05, so May 2025, and then you have another format of that string 05-2025, so that either the year comes at the beginning or the year comes at the end. Normally, you would have to create two separate regexes for that, but with duplicate capture groups, you can just use an OR expression like a vertical bar, and you can capture the year using both formats. So that's kind of nice.
Exactly.
Okay. There is a PSA with all of this, which is if you're listening to this right now and you're like, oh, I want to go check these out and use some of these APIs, not all of them are in the official Node typings yet. There is a PR that's in progress in the definitely typed repo. That's number 72589. So hopefully, in the next week or two, that'll get merged, but that will bring in all these new APIs that Node 24 supports. So in the meantime, you're going to need to augment the global typings so that you can get some of these APIs if you want to use them. Now, I've done a little bit of a service for you, hopefully. I have put together a list of all these different language features and an example of using each of them. And I put it in a GitHub repo, so you can just pull it down and you can play with it if you want to. And I will try to get some of those typings in there, but we'll see. But at least I got a reference for you, so if you want to check out some of these snippets and how they work, we'll include that in the show notes. All right, so that covers the language features. What do we want to move on to now? TypeScript FM is sponsored by Excalibur.js, the friendly TypeScript game engine for the web. Like many of you, I got into computers because I loved video games and dreamed of making one, but game development always felt a bit intimidating. Instead, I built a career in web development, though that dream of making games never really went away. Then I met Eric, who showed me I could use my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills to create games with just a bit of game design knowledge and the right engine. Excalibur.js makes game development approachable, offering everything you need to build 2D web games. Arcade physics, sprites, animations, input support, and integrations with tools like Tiled and Sprite. It's beginner-friendly, yet flexible enough to grow with you. Our team has published 10 games using Excalibur, all written in TypeScript. If you're a web developer looking to dip your toes into game dev or sharpen your TypeScript skills, give Excalibur.js a try at excalibur.js.com. Click the big tutorial button to start building your first game, Excalibur, a Flappy Bird clone. After that, join our friendly Discord community of web developers who love to help each other and share game dev tips.
No release is complete without some deprecations and removals.
Yeah, what are we leaving behind?
So there's a couple things, and this is kind of the idea here with these, a lot of them, the overarching thread in my mind is we're moving towards more browser-like APIs. So that's, I think, what you're going to see as a lot of these. It doesn't apply to every one of them, but the one that first in mind is the URL.Parse API. It's, in Node, you use the lowercase URL.Parse. Now we're using the WG capital URL API instead. This is aligning with browser standards, more or less,
nice,
to reduce and increase isomorphic code. Isomorphic meaning same shape. Yep. So you don't have to worry about that. And then a lot of these things now inside of Node, you're going to be using the new keyword. So there was a way of instantiating the REPL without a new, and then instantiating zlib classes without a new. You're going to have to use the new keyword now, which is good. It hints to you what's actually happening, which is good. So there's TLS create secure pair has been removed. That was previously deprecated. And slow buffer has been deprecated as well. So you'll get a nastygram on that one.
It's just gone.
It's gone. The name lends itself to being like, oh, I don't think I want that.
I would like, instead of the fast buffer, can you give me the slow buffer, please?
I would like the slow one. The last thing is you can no longer pass args to spawn and exec file in a child process.
Okay.
So this is gone.
I recall, briefly, long time ago that I might have done this. Is there like does a blog post mention maybe a different approach to doing that, or is there more of a canonical way to do that nowadays?
Yeah, I'm pulling this up. And this is mostly, the reasoning behind this is mostly for security, as you might have guessed.
Yeah.
The reason is that when it accepts args, it gives the false impressions that the args are escaped when they're really concatenated. So it's just a shell vulnerability waiting to happen.
I see.
So, this breaks any code that is using args to pass exec file or spawn with shell equals true. And this is just a thing that you're going to have to do. I don't see an option to work around this.
Just don't do it because it's a security issue.
Yeah, it's just a security issue.
Okay. Well, at any rate, you just want to be aware of these deprecations, and you can refer to the release blog post for details on that. But there's some other new features. We've got NPM 11.
Excellent. NPM 11 comes with some security changes, notably the -- ignore - scripts now applies to all Lifecycle scripts, which it probably should have originally, but that includes the prepare lifecycle. So if you were depending on that and you're a package author, you probably rethink that.
Yeah, that's a breaking change. The other interesting thing with NPM 11, when you're publishing a package with a pre-release version, you also now need to explicitly specify a tag. So I don't know if this affects the Excalibur build pipeline, It might. I don't know. I think we usually explicitly specify a tag, don't we? We usually say like edge, I think is the one that we use.
Yeah, I believe so. I don't think we'll run afoul, but I'll double check because this could maybe hit us. But this is actually like a nice feature because it prevents you from accidentally doing a pre-release version to like the default tag.
Latest. Yeah. Yep. I think so. That's a good change, I think. And then the other notable thing is that we talked about before, PSA, Node 18 is now end of life as of April 30th. So NPM 11 only supports Node 20 and above. So just be aware of that before upgrading.
Another notable change is that Node 24 brings along Undici 7. And for the uneducated on this one, this is the HTTP client library that Node uses. And this just brings in numerous improvements to the capabilities and better performance.
Yes. There was actually a talk at one of the recent summits where the creator of Undici, who's on the Node.js team, discussed it. And so I think we linked to that previously, but I'll link to it again if you want to check out more about it. There's some test runner improvements. So like we said on Tuesday, really the big thing here is that it'll wait for subtests automatically. So before you had to manually await like a t.test, because you can create subtests under like a regular test. So that just like nests them. So Node.js will now just wait for them automatically. You don't have to manually await them. Cool. I think we covered pretty much everything, didn't we? Did we miss anything? Was there something that we missed?
I don't think so. The next things to maybe look at is the future.
Yeah. And I mentioned the Next 10 committee, the working group that sort of sets the strategy for what's going on, for the next 10 years for Node.js. And I think reading through their technical priorities is pretty cool. Now, one thing that you mentioned before was that it seems like a lot of the deprecations are because we're moving to more web standards. And that is actually part of the strategy laid out by the team. So Node wants to move more towards web standards. And that's nice because we know that Dino and Bun also sort of have that same philosophy. That's how they started. And now Node is moving that way too. The other cool thing is we've talked a bit about Dino compile and creating single executables. And I think Bun can also produce a single executable. And I mean, Node has not had that ability. So that's on the priority list, is to create single executable applications. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's another couple things on this list that are exciting to see, notably like small footprint software. So, let's run like a minimal node process, maybe for like IoT or serverless. Which is, important for your wallet. And the serverless side is if you can run the smallest possible process. And the other thing where, with regards to serverless, is they're looking at how do we make this faster? There's been some experiments in the last year or so last 2 years now with the lightweight Lambda runtime from Amazon, which eschews V8 entirely and uses QuickJS to run JavaScript fully interpreted because they don't want to pay for the JIT cost of running a JavaScript process. They just want to start interpreting the code as fast as possible. So good for like short-lived processes. So, it'll be interesting to see how Node evolves in that direction for short-lived processes.
Yeah. So one of the other things related to a small footprint, not just performance, but also a better developer experience. So they are trying to prioritize like a developer first DX. So that includes documentation, community support, testing tools, integration with other systems. And then it also mentions as TypeScript usage continues to grow and gains more prominence in the ecosystem, enhancing its support is essential. And so we already have seen that with this, bringing of TypeScript now into Node 23 and Node 24. And so hopefully we're going to see even more of that, which is good news for us.
Yeah, I think this is really good news. And one like editorial note that I'm going to add is this strategy seems very similar to Bun and Dino. So I think what we'll likely need to see from Bun and Dino is different ways of competing, I think, to stay relevant, because Node certainly looks like is the safest bet right now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think It would be cool. It would be nice to maybe have some kind of panel discussion episode on like some of what the future of these runtimes kind of look like, because they do seem to be converging, and Node, has the most momentum and is the biggest one. Anything that Bun and Dino put out, Node can just slurp up into the next release, basically, or every couple releases. And so as an end user, it's like, why switch if the DX is going to be getting better and better with every single Node release? Why not stick with it, right? And it's just a pragmatic thing to be thinking about. And so I think these other runtimes are going to have to come to grips with like, how do they play in this game? Like trying to go up against the big fish is really tough.
Yeah. They're competing in the same space, as far as I can tell, for the most part. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I imagine the folks in those other runtimes are having these discussions.
Yeah, who are we from the outside to question that stuff? But I mean, it's interesting to talk about anyway.
Yeah. Well, this was great. This is going to be one of the biggest Node releases in a good long while. I know I am very excited to be using this in my own production contexts.
Yeah, I'm glad that we did this because there was just a lot that I had not been aware of, like especially for a lot of those JavaScript updates. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, and that's why I went to the trouble of creating the little snippets so that I could test each one and see what it was like in TypeScript. So I hope that it was useful for you, dear listener, but I think that's all we got for today.
That's all we got. See you next time.
See you next week.
All right. Bye.
Peace.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to TypeScript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at Kamronigus.com, and Eric is at EricOnerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at TypeScript.fm.